It is every parent's worst nightmare that someone will take his or her child away from them. And mostly we worry about the strangers. That's why we tell our kids never to talk to anyone they don't know, and never to take anything from them or go anywhere with them. Good advice. Now, it always has been. But for some parents, strangers are the least of their concerns. They had their children's other parent to worry about. The stories typically follow this pattern. Two parents, one Canadian, one with citizenship in another country, they split up. The Canadian parent gets custody of the kids. The other one gets visitation rights. And then they use the visitation to take the children right out of the country and refuse to send them back home. Their custodial parent does everything they can to the best of the system's abilities to get those kids back. But foolish court decisions and bureaucratic mazes make it difficult. Many of those parents are still waiting. And now they're calling for greater enforcement of the so-called Hague Child Abduction Convention, the international treaty dealing specifically with kids abducted by their non-custodial parents. Advocates say there are no penalties for a non-custodial parent who fails to comply with the law and just keeps the kids. And they've gotten fed up with trying to just persuade signatory countries to step up their game on their own. So they have formed an advocacy group hoping for strength in numbers. For their sake and for their children's sake, it's time for some Canadian common sense. Stephen Watkins, you've met him before on this show. He's based in Toronto. He's the founder of iCHAPEAU, International Child Harbouring and Abduction Prevention Enforcement Act under law. He's been fighting for his two sons, Alexander and Christopher, to return to this country. They've been living in Poland with their mother. Polish courts have ruled that they are to stay there. He'll share more of his story in just a few minutes. In the meantime, I want to share some other parent stories with you. There's Alissa Zagaris, an American citizen. She married and had a son with Nikos Zagaris, a Greek visa student. They divorced after a stormy marriage. Nikos went back to Greece. Alissa thought their son Leo would be safe with Nikos and allowed him to have international child visitation. So let me take you to the summer of 2011. She sends Leo, her son, to visit his dad in Greece. And he's been there for 18 months. Since then, Greek courts have ruled twice that Leo must be returned to his mom in Canada. But they cannot enforce that ruling until a judge denies an appeal from Nikos. And that's how that international treaty works. The non-custodial parent can sometimes get multiple chances to appeal. Then there's the case of Roberto Martinez. He began a relationship with Roxanne Parada, and she became pregnant. But as their relationship fell apart, she refused to share any info about the child. Roberto didn't find out until after the fact, when their son Jadon had been born. Roxanne was granted custody, but one day in 2008, she just didn't show up for a scheduled visit, and she stopped attending court appearances. And her parents told Roberto the baby was sick. But they knew Roxanne had taken the baby to Chile, which has not signed the Hague Child Abduction Convention. So Roberto is fighting the Chilean courts for custody of Jadon, granted to him legally by the Ontario Court of Justice. Last story for now. It's about Bruce Gherbetti. He has 3 daughters, Rion, Lauren, and Julia. The mother is Japanese, Teiko Suzuki. When Bruce and Teiko's marriage broke down, she falsely accused him of domestic abuse. When he returned from jail, having been proven innocent, Teiko, the girls, all their things gone from the house. He believes they may have been at Teiko's family home, just 500 meters from the Fukushima nuclear plant, when its radiation leaks began. And like Chile, Japan has not signed that Hague Convention. Like Roberto Martinez, Bruce believes his only way to get his girls back is for the Canadian government to actually enforce treaties Japan has signed, like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Can you see the common threads here? If an overseas court is not dragging its feet, it has no international child abduction law to enforce, because its government hasn't signed the law. In the meantime, Canadian and American parents are paying for every form of legal help they can get their hands on, to no avail, apparently. And their ex-husbands and wives, not interested in what's best for the children. They're interested in what's best for themselves. So the question is, why doesn't our government, the Canadian government, do more? Why aren't they rallying to these parents' side? Yes, their prime responsibility is to ensure that Canadian children are safe from fear, from want, from irresponsible and irrational people who commit international crimes in their name. Parents like Stephen Watkins and Alissa Zagaris and Roberto Martinez and Bruce Gherbetti. Folks, they deserve better than what they've been getting. The government has already done a few good things to protect Canadian kids when they're on Canadian soil. It's time our government thought of the others. They're still Canadian. They deserve our protection. And that's Canadian common sense.